For 30 years, she walked into a studio and did what no one else in media dared to do. She told the truth loudly, no apologies, straight up. Millions tuned in every morning, not because she was polished, but because she refused to be. At her peak, she was the most talked about woman in daytime television. Her name was on a street. Her star sits on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Her voice was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. She built an empire from nothing, on gossip, on nerve, and on the kind of raw, unfiltered honesty that made powerful people seriously uncomfortable. And then, out of nowhere, the loudest woman in the room went silent. Not by choice, not by retirement, but through a chain of events so specific, so layered, and so brutal that it reads. Music, less like bad luck and more like the most devastating irony in entertainment history. A woman who spent her entire life exposing other people's secrets suddenly stripped of her voice, her freedom, and the spotlight she had fought like hell to earn. How does someone build that much, survive that much, and still end up fighting just to walk out of her own front door? What was really going on behind the sequin gowns and the Hot Topics desk long before the world was allowed to see it? And who were the people closest to her, the ones she trusted the most while the walls were slowly closing in? Before we answer any of that, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. Because the story of how Wendy Williams fell apart only makes sense when you understand exactly what it took for her to stand up in the first place. Wendy Joan Williams was born on July 18, 1964 in Asbury Park, New Jersey, a shore town that smelled like salt air and summer ambition. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and standing out was either a blessing or a curse. She was the second of 3 children born to Thomas and Shirley Williams, 2 educators who carried themselves with a quiet, dignified authority that shaped every corner of their household. Thomas wasn't just a teacher. In 1969, he became the first black school administrator in Red Bank, New Jersey, a milestone that carried serious weight in a country still raw from the wounds of the civil rights era. Shirley taught special education, pouring patience and compassion into classrooms most people ignored. Together they raised their kids on a foundation of discipline, education, and the unspoken expectation that excellence wasn't optional. On paper, it looked like the perfect upbringing. 2 degrees hanging on the walls, books stacked on shelves, a family that prayed together on Sundays and pushed each other forward nonstop. But even ideal households carry invisible pressure. And for Wendy, that pressure showed up early, written not on paper, but on her body. By 6th grade, she was already 5 feet 7 inches tall and wore a size 11 shoe. In a world that already had strict ideas about what a black girl should look like, sound like, and act like, Wendy Williams didn't fit any of the boxes. She was loud when she was supposed to be quiet. She was big when she was supposed to be small. She was electric when the room wanted calm. And her parents, worried about her weight, put her on a diet while she was still in elementary school. Maybe the intention was health, but the scar it left ran way deeper. Wendy would later talk about those years with a level of honesty that made audiences shift in their seats. The feeling of being watched, judged, measured, and somehow coming up short by the very people whose love was supposed to be unconditional. The girl who would one day dissect celebrity insecurities on national television had spent her childhood quietly drowning in her own. Her sister Wanda was the scholar, straight-A student, Tufts University at just 16, the kind of kid who made parents beam with pride. Wendy wasn't that. She was restless, hyperactive, so much so that doctors even suggested medication to manage her energy. She played clarinet in the marching band. She swam on the swim team. She volunteered as a candy striper. She was a brownie, even announced baseball games for her younger brother's Little League team. Basically, she tried anything that could channel the chaos inside her into something the world would accept. But nothing hit her the way radio did. Late at night, lying in her room in the family's new home in Ocean Township, where they moved after race riots shook Asbury Park in 1970, Wendy would press her ear close to the speaker and listen to New York City radio. The DJs talking between songs, those voices that seemed to hold entire cities in their hands. There was power in that sound. Something she couldn't fully explain yet, but she felt it deep. One day, she decided that voice was going to be hers. She showed up at Northeastern University in Boston in the early 1980s, chasing a communications degree with a hunger that had been building for years. At the college radio station WRBB, She grabbed her first microphone and discovered something that would shape the rest of her life. She wasn't just comfortable on air, she was a natural. While other students tripped over words and stuck to stiff, formal scripts, Wendy was magnetic, raw, direct. Listening to her didn't feel like broadcasting. It felt like a real conversation, personal, urgent, impossible to ignore. She graduated in 1986 with her bachelor's degree in communications, carrying big ambition and a voice that had zero interest in being polite. But ambition in the 1980s media world, especially for a bold, outspoken black woman, didn't exactly open doors. It meant standing outside those doors knocking, sometimes for a long damn time. Her first real break came from a place nobody expected, a radio internship in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, far from the New York stations she dreamed about. She worked in the tropical heat with a tiny audience compared to what she wanted, but she learned everything she could. She learned how to hold a room using only her voice. She learned the rhythm of radio, pacing, presence, how to make strangers feel like they've known you forever. The islands gave her something no classroom ever could. They gave her confidence in her own frequency. She came back to the mainland carrying that confidence like armor, landing at WL in Washington, D.C., before making the move every Jersey girl with a radio dream eventually makes, New York City. By the late 1980s, Wendy Williams was on 98.7 KISS FM, starting out as a fill-in DJ and grinding hard for every shift, every time slot, every second of airtime. She wasn't there to play it safe. Not even close. She talked about celebrities the same way people talked at the kitchen table, blunt, specific, music, and without that fake respect the industry expected. She dropped names. She asked the questions publicists spent ridiculous amounts of money trying to shut down, and audiences loved her for it. By the early 1990s, she had won the Billboard Award for Best On-Air Radio Personality. The girl from New Jersey who had been put on a childhood diet and told to quiet down had become the loudest, boldest voice on New York radio. But even at the height of that success, the private storms were already brewing. Her first marriage to Bert Girigori in 1994 lasted barely 5 months before falling apart in a mess of confusion and incompatibility. People who knew her during that time described a woman living two completely different lives, publicly magnetic, privately falling apart. Her cocaine addiction, which had started during her radio years, wasn't public knowledge yet. It was a secret she kept hidden in the dark while the spotlight above her kept getting brighter. Girigori would later describe her behavior during their short marriage as bizarre and erratic, a description that now feels less like criticism and more like the confused portrait of a woman battling something she hadn't even fully understood yet. Wendy herself would later admit it openly. The cocaine was there. The chaos was real. You and the love, whatever form it took, was not enough to survive it. The divorce finalized, the addiction unspoken, and the career accelerating. Wendy Williams moved into the second half of the 1990s carrying all three with her. And it was in the bruised aftermath of that first failed marriage, somewhere between the ruins of a quiet private life and the roar of a radio empire, that she met the man who would become her longest chapter. His name was Kevin Hunter. They crossed paths at a skating rink in 1994, and something about that moment straight up rearranged the order of her life. He wasn't some media guy. He had run a beauty salon. He knew nothing about broadcasting, nothing about radio dynasties, nothing about the wild madness of building a public persona from scratch. But he showed up in a way that felt like a real anchor. And for a woman who had spent her whole life being told she was too big, too loud, or just too much, being anchored felt, for the first time, like finally coming home. She couldn't have known, standing there on that ice, that the man she was choosing to anchor herself to would one day become the deepest wound in a life already full of them. That the anchor would eventually drag her under. That the home she thought she had found would turn out to be a carefully built cage. And by the time she realized it, the lock would already be in place. But that reckoning was still years away. For now there was the rink, the loud noise of the city outside, and a woman who had survived childhood shame, academic pressure, a failed marriage, and a secret addiction, and was still somehow standing. Still loud, still hungry, still completely, unapologetically herself. By 1994, Wendy Williams wasn't just a radio personality. She was a straight-up phenomenon. At Hot 97, the station that defined New York hip-hop culture in its most electric era. Wendy had carved out something nobody had really seen before. While other DJs played music and moved on, she stayed in the conversation. She asked questions no publicist had approved. She repeated rumors that labels had spent serious money trying to bury. She called artists out by name, broke down their relationships, and treated celebrity culture not like something sacred, but like something to be examined loudly, specifically, and without the slightest apology. The hip-hop world didn't always rock with her for it. In an industry built on image and loyalty, Wendy Williams was a problem. Artists who sat across from her never quite knew what was coming. Some loved the thrill of it. Others straight up walked out. One interview, a tense on-air exchange with Whitney Houston, became instant radio legend. The kind of moment people replay for decades, not because it was comfortable, but because it was real. Two women, both larger than life, both carrying private storms under public armor, meeting in the charged air of a live microphone. The tension was thick, the honesty was brutal, and the audience listening at home couldn't turn it off. That was the Wendy Williams formula. Not malice, not cruelty, friction that felt like truth. But truth in the music industry of the 1990s came with a price. In 1998, Wendy Williams was fired from Hot 97. The official reasons were never fully explained, but the unofficial ones were all over the place. She had pushed too hard, asked too many questions, said things that made powerful people uncomfortable. In a world where radio stations depended on record label relationships and artist access, a host who burned those bridges on every broadcast was eventually going to find herself on the wrong side of a contract. The firing was quick and, by her own account, devastating. She was at the height of her audience. She was the most talked about voice in New York radio. And just like that, she was off the air without a platform in a city that had just watched her lose the biggest stage she had ever held. Philadelphia gave her somewhere to land at WSL Power 99 FM. She rebuilt quietly, at least by her standards, which still meant louder than almost everybody else in the market. Philadelphia's audience embraced her with a loyalty that New York, for all its size, had never quite delivered. They didn't need her to be polished. They needed her to be real. And real was the one thing Wendy Williams had never stopped being, even when it cost her everything. But New York was always the destination, always the city that mattered most, the place where the biggest stages lived and the largest audiences waited. And in 2001, the call finally came. WBLS hired her for her own nationally syndicated afternoon drive show, The Wendy Williams Experience. She returned to New York not as some cautionary tale, but as a straight-up conqueror. The show became a cultural institution almost immediately, syndicated across markets and reaching audiences far beyond the 5 boroughs. And the Wendy Williams Experience wasn't just a radio program. It was more like a daily hangout. Fans didn't just tune in. They scheduled their afternoons around it. They called in with their own stories. They trusted her with a kind of personal, everyday loyalty that most media personalities spend entire careers trying to build and never quite manage. By 2009, the Radio Hall of Fame inducted her. By 2014, her hometown of Asbury Park renamed the street where she grew up Wendy Williams Way. The girl who had been put on a diet by her parents, who had stood 5 feet 7 inches in 6th grade and felt like a giant in all the wrong ways, now had her name on a street sign in the neighborhood that had once made her feel small. On the surface, it was a massive win. But surfaces, Wendy Williams had spent her entire career reminding the world, rarely tell the whole story. Kevin Hunter had entered her life as an anchor. By the late 1990s, he had become something far more complicated. Her manager, her business partner, and on November 30th, 1999, her husband. The marriage was sealed in a civil ceremony in Jersey City, New Jersey. And in the year 2000, their son Kevin Hunter Jr. was born. A child Wendy would describe in every interview that followed as the single greatest accomplishment of her life. The boy she had fought through multiple miscarriages to bring into the world. The child who made every sacrifice feel worth it. For a while, the arrangement worked. Hunter had no prior television experience, no media background, no understanding of the industry that had made his wife famous. But he understood power. He understood positioning. And he understood that the Wendy Williams brand, handled right, was worth a crazy amount of money. He became her executive producer. He ran the business side of an empire that was growing faster than either of them had expected. People who worked closely with the couple during that time described a dynamic that never quite felt equal. Hunter was in every room that mattered. His name was on every contract. His approval was needed for decisions that, on any other show, would have belonged completely to the talent. And Wendy Williams, the woman who had spent her entire career refusing to let anyone silence her, had built her empire with a man who had placed himself right between her and the rest of the world. The warning signs were already there. A 2008 lawsuit filed by a former employee of the Wendy Williams Experience claimed that Kevin Hunter had sexually harassed staff and created a hostile work environment. It also claimed that on at least one occasion, Hunter had entered the studio, cleared the room, and physically assaulted Williams, pinning her against a wall with his hand at her throat. The case was settled out of court. The details mostly disappeared under the noise of a career that, from the outside, was still climbing higher and higher. Wendy said nothing publicly. She kept wearing the ring as she defended the marriage on air whenever rumors started popping up. She stood by her story with the same conviction she applied to every other story she told, loudly, directly, and without visible hesitation. But those closest to her noticed the weight she was carrying, the exhaustion that lived beneath the performance, the way the laughter in the studio sometimes felt like armor rather than joy. In 2008, the Wendy Williams Show launched in 4 test markets. The following year, Fox signed a national deal with DeMar Mercury to broadcast it across the country. Wendy Williams had completed the transition from radio queen to television star, and the audience followed her every step of the way. At its peak, the show drew 2.4 million daily viewers. Wendy traded the #1 spot for female daytime host back and forth with Ellen DeGeneres. She received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2019. Her catchphrases entered the cultural vocabulary. Her wigs became iconic. Her guest interviews were unpredictable in the best possible way because the woman conducting them had never learned to play it safe. And she sure wasn't about to start now. "How you doing?" became more than a greeting. It became a signal that you were in the presence of someone who was going to tell you the truth, whether you asked for it or not. But behind the set, behind the live audience and the Hot Topics desk, and the dramatic entrances in sequin gowns, the private truth was getting harder to hold together. The marriage was cracking along fault lines that had existed for years, and the addiction Wendy had been battling since her radio days had never fully backed off. And the body that carried her through 3 decades of performing, the body she had been taught to feel ashamed of since childhood, was starting to send signals she couldn't ignore anymore. The show was still on the air. The ratings were still strong. The audience still showed up every morning ready to see what she'd say next. But the woman behind the microphone was running out of road, and she was running out of it alone. There's a special kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too much, but from pretending. From walking into a room every morning acting like everything's solid when every private hour is spent trying to keep your life from falling apart. Wendy Williams had been carrying that kind of exhaustion for years before the world finally saw a glimpse of it. In February 2018, live on air during a Halloween episode, she fainted. Not metaphorically, not dramatically the way TV sometimes stages drama for ratings. She straight up fainted. In full costume, dressed as the Statue of Liberty, torch in hand, collapsing forward in front of a live studio audience while the camera kept rolling. Her team rushed to her side. The broadcast cut away, and for a few terrifying minutes, the most consistently present woman in daytime television had disappeared from her own stage. She recovered. She came back and finished the episode. She even joked about it afterward with the kind of bold energy people expected from her, because Wendy Williams had built her entire career on the idea that she was tough as nails, that nothing could knock her down for long. Whatever the world threw at her, she'd get back up, fix her wig, and get back to business. But that fainting spell wasn't just some random moment. It was a warning sign, and those signs had been building for a long time, longer than anyone outside her inner circle realized. Graves' disease had been living in her body for years before she spoke about it publicly. It's an autoimmune disorder that attacks the thyroid, and it comes with a whole set of symptoms that from the outside can look confusing. Exhaustion that doesn't go away no matter how much you rest, weight changes that don't make sense, and a nervous system that feels like it's always running on the wrong frequency. Winnie had been managing it quietly, The way she handled most things that threatened to reveal the gap between the woman on camera and the woman behind the scenes. In February 2018, just days before that Halloween collapse, she had already announced a 3-week break from the show. Graves' disease, she told her audience. She said she'd be back, and she always came back. But this time, the break stretched longer. Guest hosts filled the chair. Audiences waited. And behind the studio doors, the full weight of what Wendy Williams had been carrying started to reveal itself piece by piece. The health crisis was real, and it wasn't happening alone. It was happening inside a marriage that had been quietly wrecking her for years. Rumors about Kevin Hunter and a massage therapist had floated around tabloid circles for more than a decade. Wendy addressed them on air with the kind of confident brush-off that only someone deep in denial or deep in survival mode can pull off. She held up her wedding ring. She defended him publicly again and again with the same conviction she used for every hot take on her show. Then in the spring of 2019, the baby arrived. Hunter's alleged mistress gave birth to his child. The affair that had been whispered about for years was suddenly impossible to deny. And the story Wendy Williams had been holding together with pure willpower for 20 years blew apart in a single news cycle. She filed for divorce in April 2019 after 20 years of marriage. People close to her during that time described a woman dealing with a kind of grief that didn't have a clean shape. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of an entire structure. Kevin Hunter wasn't just her husband. He was her manager, her executive producer, her business partner, the guy whose name was tied into the machinery of everything she had built. Divorcing him didn't just mean ending a relationship. It meant tearing apart a professional empire and trying to rebuild it from scratch while cameras were still pointed at her face. And somehow she did it. She came back to the show. She sat in that chair. She told her audience what had happened. Not every detail, not like some dramatic confessional, but with enough honesty that the studio went quiet in a way it almost never did. She wasn't pretending to be strong that day. She was showing it. But the price of that strength was huge. Wendy Williams had been sober from cocaine for years. She had talked openly about her addiction, claimed it as part of her story instead of hiding from it. But addiction doesn't just pack its bags and disappear because you talked about it once. It waits. And grief creates cracks. The grief of that spring, the betrayal, the divorce, the public humiliation of a woman who had spent her career talking about everyone else's scandals suddenly becoming the headline herself. That kind of crack can swallow a person whole. She checked herself into a sober living facility. She told her audience about it on air, calm and direct, the same way she always delivered the toughest truths. She was getting help. She was putting herself first. She was going to be okay. And she was fighting like hell to make that true. The show continued through 2019 and into 2020. Divorce finalized. Sobriety maintained, one tough day at a time. Kevin Hunter Jr., now a young man, remained the constant. The reason she kept the schedule, kept the chair, kept showing up even when every part of her body and history was telling her to quit. But the body was keeping its own score. Graves' disease doesn't just disappear because you push through it. Lymphedema, a chronic condition causing painful swelling in the legs and feet, had taken hold. Photos from that time showed a woman clearly struggling, moving slowly and carefully like someone managing pain the audience couldn't see from their seats. She talked about the lymphedema directly, the way she talked about everything, bluntly, almost like she was daring the world to judge her. On tough days, she used a mobility scooter. She mentioned it herself before anyone else could turn it into gossip. But the weight she was carrying wasn't just physical anymore. People close to her started noticing something harder to describe than swollen legs or thyroid problems. A new difficulty with words sometimes. A brief pause where she used to speak without thinking. A slight dimming in the sharp precision that had always made her intimidating. The woman who had spent 30 years talking faster and sharper than anyone else in the room was sometimes now searching for the next sentence. No one named it yet. Not publicly. Not even privately in a way that raised alarms. People blamed exhaustion, grief, the emotional wreckage of a year that had broken parts of her that hadn't healed yet. Then in 2021, Wendy Williams took a leave of absence from her show, citing health complications. Guest hosts stepped in. The audience waited. The network waited the same way they had in 2018, the same way they had waited before. believing the woman who always came back would walk through that door again. This time she didn't. In 2022, it was announced that Sherry Shepherd would take over the time slot. The Wendy Williams Show, after 13 seasons, was done. No farewell episode, no final bow, no standing ovation, none of that big ceremonial goodbye, a career that Huge totally deserved. It just ended. Music and silence. The chair stayed. The Hot Topics desk stayed. A different woman sat down. And Wendy Williams, the loudest voice in daytime television, just vanished from the place she built with her own hands, without ever getting the chance to say goodbye. Silence had always been the enemy for Wendy Williams. Her whole career was built on refusing to be quiet, on the belief that saying the truth out loud, no matter how uncomfortable, was way better than the polite fake calm of silence. She gave her voice to millions of people who felt invisible. For 30 years, she walked into studios and filled them with the kind of noise that made the whole world stop and listen. Which is why what happened next wasn't just sad. It was almost brutally precise. Because what got taken from Wendy Williams wasn't her money, wasn't her home, and wasn't even her fame. What got taken was the one thing she had fought her whole damn life to own. Her voice. In 2022, Wells Fargo petitioned a New York court to place Wendy Williams under financial guardianship. The bank's claim was blunt and crystal clear. They alleged Williams was an incapacitated person. They said she was a victim of undue influence and financial exploitation. They argued that her accounts, the wealth built from a 3-decade career she created completely on her own terms, were no longer safe in her own hands. Wendy pushed back, publicly, privately, through lawyers, and through the pure force of a personality that had never taken no for an answer. She said she wasn't incapacitated. She said she was a college-educated woman, a globally recognized figure, someone who had been making big decisions her entire adult life and didn't need some court system telling her how to run her own damn life. The court didn't see it that way. A guardian was appointed. An attorney, Sabrina Morrissey, was given authority over Williams's finances and eventually her health decisions. Wendy was moved into a luxury memory care facility in New York, the Coterie in Hudson Yards, reportedly costing $25,000 a month. Her daily movements required approval. Leaving the building required permission. The woman who once moved between cities and continents on her own schedule, who filled arenas, who commanded entire networks, now had to ask someone else for permission just to walk out the front door. She called the place a dump. She told anyone who would listen that she didn't belong there, that the memory care floor wasn't where she should be, that she was stuck in a place meant for people who had lost themselves, while she was still, music, stubbornly and completely present. Whether that was entirely true was something the world was still trying to figure out. In February 2024, an answer arrived in the form of a diagnosis that had been building quietly for years. Wendy Williams had been diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia and frontotemporal dementia, the same brutal conditions that had publicly taken the abilities of actor Bruce Willis. The announcement came through a press release from her medical team, carefully worded and compassionate. The diagnosis had been confirmed in 2023 after a series of tests conducted at Weill Cornell Medicine. Her team said going public wasn't easy, but it was necessary for Wendy and for the thousands of people going through the same invisible battle. Primary progressive aphasia attacks the brain's language centers. It slowly erodes the ability to speak, read, write, and understand what others are saying. At first it shows up in small ways. A word that won't come, a sentence that falls apart halfway through. Then it speeds up, and there's no cure, no treatment that stops it. No version of this story where the voice that was taken suddenly comes back completely. For a woman who built everything on her voice, the diagnosis carried weight far beyond medicine. It wasn't just clinical news. It was the cruelest irony imaginable. The shock jock who talked nonstop for 30 years. The woman whose mouth made her famous, made her enemies, and made her unforgettable. Silenced. Music. Not by a network executive. Not by corporate politics. Not by cancel culture. But by her own brain. Her team said she still had her sense of humor. That she could still do many things for herself. That she was receiving proper care. Those things were true, and they were meant kindly. But they were also the language of loss carefully wrapped in hope. That same month, a 4-part documentary aired on Lifetime. Where is Wendy Williams? It had been filmed over 2 years, following Wendy after her show was canceled, a period the public had barely seen. The cameras were there the whole time, and they caught things that, in hindsight, her guardian said should never have been filmed at all. The documentary showed a woman in visible cognitive and emotional distress, sometimes confused, sometimes scared, sometimes seeming to push back against the cameras themselves. Like some part of her knew the version of her being recorded wasn't the one she wanted the world to remember. It showed the loneliness of the facility, the weight of the guardianship, the grief of a life that had shrunk suddenly from global to confined. Morrissey sued the production companies, claiming the documentary exploited a vulnerable woman in the most shameless way for money. She argued Wendy couldn't meaningfully consent to being filmed, let alone broadcast in such a raw state. The lawsuit described the documentary as cruel and degrading, a portrait made to satisfy public curiosity, music at the expense of Wendy's dignity. But Wendy herself said something different. She said she wanted the world to see that transparency, even painful transparency, was better than disappearing. That being seen, even broken, even diminished, even battling a disease stealing her language word by word, was better than being forgotten. Honestly, that might be the most Wendy Williams thing ever. Even while losing everything, she chose visibility over silence. In March 2025, she called into The View music from wherever she was. Live. No warning. Her voice was recognizable, though different. She told the host she wasn't incapacitated. She reminded them she was a globally recognized person who had been doing important things her whole life. And she said the court and her guardian needed to. Her words, "Get off my neck." The internet exploded. Some people saw a woman bravely fighting for her freedom. Others saw someone clearly struggling and not fully understanding the battle. Most people saw both at the same time, which is probably the truest and most heartbreaking version of reality. Then in November 2025, new neurological testing in New York changed the entire narrative. Independent evaluations suggested Wendy had shown what doctors called remarkable neurological resilience since getting sober. The frontotemporal dementia diagnosis was suddenly being questioned. Her legal team prepared to ask the court to end the guardianship completely. Whether the court would agree was still uncertain. Whether the woman who spent 60 years refusing to be silenced would finally get her voice back, fully, legally, permanently, remained an open question. But Wendy Williams was still fighting. And if you've been paying attention for the last 30 years, that shouldn't shock you at all. There's a certain kind of courage that doesn't make a big entrance. No trumpets. No dramatic movie soundtrack. It shows up quietly on random mornings when someone has every reason to quit and still decides, somehow, to keep going. Wendy Williams has been doing that for a long time. She kept going as a kid who was told her body was too big and her voice was too loud. She kept going through a first marriage that lasted 5 months and left scars that took years to understand. She kept going through addiction, through the darkness of cocaine in the back rooms of a career the public only saw from the front. She kept going after being fired from Hot 97. She rebuilt in Philadelphia. Then she climbed her way back to the city that once pushed her out. She kept going through 20 years of a marriage that, by many accounts, wasn't fully safe. Through miscarriages, through Graves' disease and lymphedema, through a body begging her to slow down long before she was ready. She kept going through a divorce that forced her to tear apart both her marriage and the professional empire built around it. She kept going after losing her show, not with applause or closure, but with the quiet humiliation of simply not being there anymore. Her chair filled by someone else. Her name slowly removed from the empire she built with her own voice. And now she's still going. Through a diagnosis attacking the very instrument that made her who she is. Through a guardianship she publicly fights every chance she gets. Through a legal battle that could shape how the system treats public figures, especially Black women, when fame, vulnerability, and control collide. What Wendy Williams built wasn't just a TV show. It was permission, proof that an outspoken, unapologetic Black woman could sit at the center of pop culture and run the damn conversation on her own terms. Before social media gave everyone a platform to speak their mind, Wendy Williams was already doing it every morning for millions of people. No filter, no softening. She made celebrities feel human. She showed that fame didn't protect anyone from hypocrisy, mistakes, or messy real life. She She made gossip feel like journalism and journalism feel like gossip, music, until the line between them practically disappeared. Her star sits on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Her name marks a street in the New Jersey town that once said she was too much. Her voice lives in the Radio Hall of Fame beside the legends she listened to as a kid with a transistor radio pressed to her ear. None of that disappears because of a disease. None of it gets erased by a court case, a guardianship, or a documentary. If anything, the fight she's in right now, for her voice, her freedom, her right to run her own life, is the most Wendy Williams thing she's ever done. She has always been at her fiercest when the odds were stacked against her. In October 2025, neurological tests suggested something the people who love her had quietly hoped for. That sobriety might have helped her brain recover in ways doctors didn't fully expect. That the diagnosis used to justify her confinement might not tell the whole story. Her legal team plans to bring that evidence to court. The ending isn't written yet, but some things already are. Wendy Williams walked into rooms where she wasn't wanted and made herself unforgettable. She told the truth in an industry built on beautiful lies. She loved her son with a fierce devotion only someone who has known deep loneliness can understand. She built something from nothing, lost it, built again, lost pieces again, and kept building anyway. She wasn't perfect. She said things that hurt people. She stayed in situations too long and left others too fast. She carried wounds she sometimes passed to others before healing them herself. She was, in every sense, a complicated woman, but she was always completely herself. And in a world constantly trying to smooth down the rough edges of people who are a little too real, that's not a small thing. That's everything. Wendy Williams is 60 years old. She's living in a facility in New York, fighting for the right to walk out of it on her own terms. Somewhere in that building, the woman who once asked the world, "How you doing?" every single morning is waiting for someone to ask her the same question back. So ask it. Remember her not as a warning story, but as proof of what it looks like when someone refuses, through addiction, betrayal, illness, and silence, to stop being themselves. If her story moved you, drop a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe. Because the people who shape this world deserve more than a headline. They deserve the whole story. This was Wendy Williams. All of it.